Hey guys, what's up? It's Samantha, and today I am going to be tier ranking all 160 books that I read in 2022. Actually, not all 160 books because I did read A Court of Silver Flames twice, so that picture's only on there once, and I did not include the 3 nonfiction books that I read this year because it feels weird to tier rank nonfiction when I only read a few nonfiction against all of this, fiction and fantasy. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. I have simplified my categories from when I've done this in the past. We have all-time favorites, which are year-over-year books that I will continue to consider my favorites. Loved it. These are the 5 stars, the 4.75 stars, that kind of thing. Really liked it. These are the 4-star books. Not quite perfect, but very enjoyable. Liked it. It was fine, but it wasn't a new favorite, but I would still recommend it. Trash Panda Seal of Approval is for those books that are, not necessarily quality literature, but that I enjoyed, and we all know what kind of books I'm talking about. So the stuff that is maybe, I had a great time with it, but I understand it's not necessarily well written. Meh is books that aren't necessarily bad books, but books that were disappointing to me in some way. Books that were kind of that lower 3-star, 2-star, 2.5 kind of situation. Books that I would recommend to the right reader, but were not necessarily for me, but they weren't indefensibly bad. It was just my personal taste didn't jive with it. And then Bad, and then Bad, which are the books that I just thought were bad. These are mostly 1-star books, maybe some lower 2-star books, but just books that you will never hear me recommending them pretty much to anyone. So, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it, try to keep this as fast as possible. So the first book I have here is The Alloy of Law, which is the first book in the second era Mistborn series. This is way more fun and lighthearted than the first era of Mistborn, and it's kind of got some crime procedural elements going on, some Wild West stuff, flintlock fantasy, just a good time. This doesn't have a cover because the cover hasn't been revealed yet, but this is My Arc of Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. And I'm going to put this in Really Liked It. It's like a Sleeping Beauty retelling from the perspective of the Maleficent equivalent, and I had a good time with it. Return of the Thief is the 6th and final book in the Queen's Thief series by Megan Mullen Turner, and I loved this series. I feel like the series is greater than the sum of its parts. Not all the books were 5-star books for me, but the series as a whole is absolutely fantastic, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I don't know if this or the second book is my favorite in the series. I'm going to put this in all-time favorites for now. Earthsea, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. I did not like this. I understand the importance of this, but I do not particularly enjoy fantasy with super sparse prose, and this is very sparse. She definitely has an economy of words going on, and it doesn't work for me, but I understand there's a big nostalgia factor for a lot of people with this, and if I had read it when I was a young kid, I probably would feel very differently about it. Shadows of Self is the second book in Mistborn Era 2, and I really love that. Crown of Midnight, I think, is the second book in Throne of Glass. I read Throne of Glass this year, which I thought I was never going to read, and I ended up buying all of the books and marathoning them, and I actually really enjoyed the series. It might be my favorite SJM series. I don't know. I had a lot more fun than I thought I would with it. I'm going to put this in Really Liked It. Wasn't my favorite in the series, but I thought it was pretty solid. The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon was meh for me. I think I gave it 2 stars. I feel like there's a lot of potential with this story, and I do want to continue the series, but I did not particularly care about what was going on in this book. It was not a super long book, but it felt like the book that would never end, which I'm starting to realize is a pattern with Samantha Shannon books for me. So the Mime Order I liked it more than the Bone Season, but I saw, like, not so much in the last year, but maybe 2 years ago, a lot of book talk and Bookstagram content about how this was like a book that will give you emotional damage, and I didn't get that from this book at all. But I thought it did some more interesting things with the world. Again, her books always feel longer than they actually are to me, so it was good. I started the third book, got a few hours into the audiobook, and then kind of accidentally DNF'd it, but I do plan on finishing it. Queen of Shadows. Is this the fourth book? I don't know. I can't keep track of all of these Throne of Glass books at all. Heir of Fire is the third one, and this one was a 5-star for me. I know that, but I read them all so quickly that oh yeah, okay, this one was fine. I liked this one. This is the one that I thought it was. So what I didn't like about this as much, I still liked it, but it felt like it was 2 books worth of plot crammed into one book, and there is the first half of the book, it almost felt like she was rushing to tie up loose plot ends from the original premise of this book, more of the Selena being an assassin kind of stuff and transitioning into the fae magic kind of stuff. And I found the assassin, that side of things, far more interesting, and it felt like she realized she wanted to take the series in a different direction and was just rushing to get rid of all of the loose plot ends. And I don't know, bad, mate her by something or other. I don't know. This book was awful. I don't know why I picked it up. I think I saw it on some recommendation thing, or heard someone talk about it on a BookTube video. I don't know. Throne of Glass, I shockingly really enjoyed this a lot. I don't really read a lot of YA, new to me YA fantasy anymore, and I really liked this one. I was really surprised. I thought I would hate it, and I ended up giving it a 4.5, and I just had a really good time with it, and I wish that the tone of this book had kind of stayed throughout the series. I feel like the men in the first couple books were way more distinct, and they weren't all just the same snarling, growling male caricature that all of the men in SJM books, they all end up being the same character. And I liked it when I felt like she was actually writing men as individuals in the beginning. I can't believe I'm saying that about a book. We need more men written as individuals or something, but it's something that drives me nuts. I don't like the alpha whole snarling, growling thing that she does. So, The Lost Metal, I'm going to put this and really liked it. I gave it a 5-star when I finished reading it, but now that I've sat with it for a little bit, I feel like it's more like a 4-star. I really enjoyed the Cosmere connections in this, but I feel like it took away from the main plot of this book in a way, and I felt like it was a little underwhelming, or there needed to be a little bit more for the plot, but I still really enjoyed it. The Bands of Mourning is probably my favorite in Second Era Mistborn. The ending is mind-blowing. It has the Sanderlanche thing going on. Then we have Priest by Sierra Simone, which is one of my all-time favorites. I've read this multiple times, and I reread it this year, and I still absolutely love it. Then Empire of Storms is probably my least favorite out of this series. I should probably bump this down to a 3. I thought this was so boring. So I did a tandem read of this and Tower of Dawn, and Tower of Dawn, unpopular opinion, is my favorite book in the entire series, and I think Kale is the only... Dorian is interesting, but I think Kale is the only truly unique male individual in this book, and all of the other guys just end up having the same super possessive, dominant personality trait, and I really like that Kale is kind of a jerk, and he's going through it, and he has his own problems, and he has to figure it out, and his character arc is a little different than just like, I'm gonna be the most powerful man alive, and I'm gonna, seduce the woman. And also, Eren in Tower of Dawn is my favorite character in the entire series. Empire of Storms, when I was going back and forth, I was just like trying to get through these chapters so I could get back to Tower of Dawn. I just don't. Aelin is my least favorite character in the entire series, which kind of sucks because she's the main character. I didn't hate her so much in the first couple books, but as it went on, I'm like, I like these books despite her, not because of her. She's not great. And like Rowan, not great. I don't like those characters at all, but I liked a lot of the side characters. So, yeah, Tower of Dawn was my favorite. This is gonna kill me. I'm gonna put volume 10 of Saga in meh. This is a sci-fi graphic novel series, and I have been waiting years for the next volume to come out. They took a hiatus. There's going to be 18 volumes in total, and they took a hiatus after volume 9 for a couple years, and volume 9 ended on a super big cliffhanger with lots of emotional stakes, like completely destroyed me, and then this was not a return to form. I just think it was meh. I gave it 3 stars, but I was so disappointed to be giving it 3 stars. Like, it wasn't bad, but I am so disappointed in this book. So I'm putting it in meh. I'm going to be honest, I do not remember the individual storylines of any of the Ice Planet Barbarian books based off of these covers. So I'm just going to put them all in Trash Panda Seal of Approval. And then The Thief by Megan Wallen Turner. I am going to put this at the top of liked it. This is probably my least favorite out of all of the books, mostly because, especially the first time you read it, I'm going to put it at the bottom of really liked it because this was a reread. The first time I read it, I was like, I don't get it. What is going on? And then you get it at the very end and you're like, oh, that's why we've been following these people who seem to be doing nothing and are just like walking around in the wilderness. Like, all of a sudden it makes sense at the end. So knowing what the plot twist was from the beginning made this a more enjoyable read the second time. But I definitely think it's the weakest out of the series, which makes sense. It's the first. It's the one that reads the most like a children's book. And then the rest of the series, honestly, like, it's very ageless, timeless fantasy. A child could read it, an adult could read it. It really isn't YA or like children's the way a lot of other series are. It's very, very timeless. I'm going to put The Queen of Atolia up here next to Return of the Thief. This was also a reread for me, and I still might think this is the strongest in the series, but I don't know. King of Atolia, I'm going to put in really liked it. And then A Conspiracy of Kings follows, I think this is the one that follows Sophos. I'm going to put this here. That wasn't like my particular favorite. Kingdom of Ash. So like, I'm going to put this up here, but like, it wasn't necessarily good. And I could definitely go down a list of everything that was wrong with this book, but I had a really good time reading it, and it felt like a very satisfying ending, at least for me. I mean, all the characters have plot armor. I get that it's not like the greatest thing of all time, but I really enjoyed reading it. Nevermore is a really charming middle grade series, and I love this. I reread the first 2 books, which are both all-time favorites, before I read the 3rd book later in the year. Where is the 3rd book cover? Because I'll just move it now since we're talking about it. I'm going to put this in loved it. I'm really excited to see where she's going with this series as Morrigan ages up and becomes a teenager. The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. I'm going to put this in liked it. I gave it like a 3.5, 3.75. I loved the main character, who is like the 7th or 8th in line for the throne, and his father and all of his older half-brothers are killed in an accident, and he ends up ascending to the throne, but he has lived kind of in exile and in isolation his whole life. And so he was never prepared for court politics. And so he has no idea what's going on, and he's very confused. And there's a lot of made up fantasy language in this book. And part of it is intentional. It makes the reader as confused as, I think his name's like Maya, makes you as confused as he is, but it is very difficult to follow what is going on sometimes. The moments where you are just inside of his head and you are experiencing like what he is going through are wonderful, but it can be very disorienting. And I think that this is a book that would get better the more times you read it and the more comfortable you got with the language. You could appreciate more of the nuance that's going on instead of just being totally dazed and confused and lost. And then I have Crimson Rain by Amelie Wen Zhao, and unfortunately I did not like this. The first and second book in this series were both like solid 4-star reads for me. I was really enjoying it. I thought it was a fun YA fantasy series, and I think this should have been 4 books, not 3. There are 2 sort of big bads left in this book, and it made dealing with the first one, who is primed at the end of the second book to be this huge problem and this huge challenge, and it basically makes them have to deal with her very, very quickly, so you're not like slowing down. It kind of screwed up the plot pacing, and then the payoff of kind of vanquishing the big bad, the first big bad, is very underwhelming because there isn't a lot of build up to it, and it happens very quickly and without much fanfare, and I was just really let down. It was a 2-star read. It wasn't terrible. I would still recommend this series. If I was younger, the ending of this might not have bothered me as much, but I just didn't love it. House of Sky and Breath was fine. Like, I liked it, but I didn't love it the way I loved the first book, which is over here. And I shockingly loved the first book in this series. I did not think I was ever going to read it. And then I somehow talked myself into reading it, and I absolutely adored it. It's the only SJM book that's ever made me tear up. And I really liked the setting of this, and a lot of the stuff that's going on in this first book is not going on anymore in the second book, and apparently those are the elements that I loved so much about the first book. So, Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers is the sequel to, oh my gosh, I'm going to blank on what it's called. The series is Monk and Robot, and they're just really wholesome, like really, really wholesome books. But for me, this was just a 4-star. The first book in the series was one of my favorite books of, I think it was in 2020 that I read it. It was one of my favorite books of the year. This was just, it was very good. There was nothing like wrong with it, but it just didn't have the same spark as the first one. But I also think these are books that, depending on when you read them, could be more or less meaningful. So I definitely could see this being a 5-star if I picked it up at a different point in my life, if that makes sense. The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison is a tie-in to The Goblin Emperor, so it follows a side character who helps solve the mystery of like the accident of blowing up the king and all the heirs. He can talk to dead people. So this is basically a crime procedural set in a fantasy world, and this takes place away from court politics and stuff. The Witness for the Dead is sent to go like live in a smaller city, and we follow him solving a crime, like a murder in that town. So I'm going to put this like up here. This was a lot of fun, and I really, really enjoy crime procedurals set in fantasy worlds. Next we have An Arrow to the Moon by Emily X.R. Pan, which unfortunately was also a 2-star read for me. This is a retelling, like a mashup of both Chang'e and Romeo and Juliet, and I wish the Romeo and Juliet part was just unnecessary. There were too many things going on. We follow so many different point of view characters, and it just didn't work for me, and I'm so disappointed because her debut novel, it's the one where the mother turns into a bird, or she thinks her mother is turned into a bird. Astonishing Color of After is one of my favorite books of all time, but An Arrow to the Moon was just a huge letdown to me, unfortunately. I think I gave my copy to a middle school teacher because I think younger kids, it's very Insta-lovey, and I think tweens or younger teens wouldn't be bothered by that as much as I was as an adult. Like, it wasn't a bad book, it just was disappointing. It was a 2-star. It was okay, but it just was such a letdown because I was expecting a new 5-star fave. And based on like the Goodreads average reviews, I'm not the only person that feels that way compared to like her first book, which is a bummer, but I will definitely check out whatever she writes next and hope this was just a lot of stuff that was written between 2020 and 2022 was kind of meh, just because the world was kind of meh. So a lot of this stuff I'm not holding against. I had like the lowest average reading year this past year, and I'm not surprised. I feel like we're kind of coming out of the slump of meh books, though. So, A Heart So Fierce and Broken. Let's do A Curse So Dark and Lonely first. I reread this so I could finish the series and read the first book in the new companion series that she's writing. And I loved this. I'm going to put this here. It was a 5-star the first time I read it, and I left the 5-star on Goodreads, but it was probably more like a 4.75, a 4.5 this time. I still had a really good time. I was afraid to reread this. I put off rereading it for a couple years because I was afraid I wasn't going to like it anymore because I've not been vibing with YA fantasy. You know, I'm a 33-year-old woman. That makes sense. But I still loved this just as much this time around. It definitely leans more new adult, even though it's not like steamy. It feels a little older than most YA fantasy. A Heart So Fierce and Broken is the second book, and I actually liked this more the second time around. I think because I knew, I'm going to put this here, I knew that we weren't following the same point of view characters, and so the first time I read it, I was disappointed that we were following different people, but now this time, I knew to expect that, and so I could appreciate it for what it was instead of just being disappointed that it wasn't what I thought it would be, if that makes sense. And then while we're at this, let's just grab the third book. And I'm going to put this right here. A Vow So Bold and Deadly is the third and final book in the series, and I really enjoyed this. I actually really liked the ending. I feel like a lot of people did not like the ending, but I thought she nailed it. It isn't necessarily what I can see, like if you had a certain character that you wanted to come out on top or something, being disappointed, but I thought that particular character was always the worst. So I was very happy with how it turned out. And then while we're on the topic, we're going to do Forging Silver into Stars, which is the first book in the follow-up companion series, and I adored this. This takes place in the same world, but it's different. Like, there's a character who is a young child in these books, and this takes place maybe, or not young, he's like 10 or something, and then these take place 10, 11, and now he's like 18 or 19, so it takes place a handful of years into the future. So all the characters who are in their early 20s here are now like late 20s, early 30s, and we follow him, but the other point of view characters are all like normal, like average people, not royalty, not rich people. They're all poor, working class. And so it's really interesting to like follow all of the royal people in these books. And then in this book, you get to see how all of the stuff that they did and like the good things they did and the bad things they did and the consequences of their actions as like the royalty of this world ended up impacting the common folk and the issues that they're having and the struggles that are going on because of like what these idiots did. So I just think that's a really cool concept. Next we have Heartstopper, and where is book one? So book one is an all-time fave, and then I really love volume 2, and volume 3 is probably my least favorite. I think this is the one when they're in Paris. So I'm gonna put this here. And then volume 4, I'm gonna just put with volume 2. And then Interior Chinatown, I'm going to put here. This was like a 4.5 for me. This is definitely a book I want to reread because I feel like it could end up being a 5-star read for me. This is so weird. It's written like a screenplay, where Chinatown is basically the setting of a show, and this guy's growing up in Chinatown, and then he is narrating his life like it's a script, and he's like living on set, and he's a like character actor, a background actor, and he's trying to become the lead actor of the show. And it's very bizarre and just absolutely wacky, and I really, really enjoyed it. Next, we have Foundry Side, which is one of my all-time favorites by Robert Jackson Bennett. If you like Mistborn, if you like hard magic systems and books, you need to check this out. We follow a thief, Sanchia, who has the ability to talk to objects or to understand, to feel objects, and it makes her a really excellent thief. And she ends up stealing an object that she doesn't realize is very dangerous, very powerful, very sought after, and she ends up getting herself kind of embroiled in a bunch of political maneuverings going on between different merchant houses in this sort of Venetian-inspired city. It's very, very good. It's very funny. It's just everything about it is what I want in a fantasy. And then this is the second book in the series. It's like, is it Nightfall or something? I don't know. I'm blanking on the name of the book. And I really liked this. This was a 4-star. It wasn't quite as good as the first one for me, but I still really enjoyed it. Next, we have what is probably my favorite new to me adult fantasy of 2022, and it's In the Shadow of Lightning by Brian McClellan, which I have not heard anyone talk about, like, at all. It is, again, like, if you liked Foundry Side, if you liked Mistborn, you need to pick this up. Brian McClellan wrote the Powder Mage books, which I haven't read because there's a ton of them, and I was very overwhelmed at the prospect of starting, like, there's multiple series that take place in the world, like companion series, and I did not have it in me to start a series, but I saw that he had a new book in a new world that was being released. I didn't even read the synopsis. I downloaded an ARC and I devoured it, and it is so, so good. And you think it's one thing, and then you get to the end, and this ends up being an entirely different genre of fantasy than what you think it is. And I can't even tell you like anything about that without spoiling it, but it is just absolutely, where this goes is so unexpected, and I haven't heard anyone talking about this, and this is just so good. The magic system revolves around glass, and it's just really, oh, it was so good. I loved the characters and the world and the magic. It worked so perfectly for me. Next, we have The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed, which I'm going to put here. It was like a 2.5, 2-star for me. This was disappointing because I loved the first half of it, and then I feel like it kind of languished in the back half, and it just didn't deliver on what the first half was setting up. So I really like Ava Reed's writing, though, and I will continue to check out all of her books that she writes because I feel like as she matures as an author, she seems like the kind of author that will write like a new favorite, if that makes sense. Even though I haven't like loved anything she's written yet, I feel like there's so much potential for her to write a new favorite that I'm going to just keep checking them out. Next, we have A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Haro, and these are like twisted fairy tale retellings. This one is Sleeping Beauty and like has multiverse elements, that kind of stuff. It's really fun. I am going to put this here. And then there is a sequel. I reread that because the second book in the series came out this year. And where is the cover of it here? A Mirror Mended, which has the same characters, but it's a Snow White retelling. And it's very interesting how that all works out. And then we have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, which this was the third time I've read this. And it's like a 3.75, 4-star read for me. I'm going to put it down here at the bottom of really liked it. The more I read this book, the more I like it. So it might be like a 4-star at this point. And while we're talking about these books, let's do The Last Graduate, which is an all-time fave. This was the second time I've read this. It's the second book in the Scalaman series, and I adore this book so much. I was shocked because the first time I read A Deadly Education, I was like, this is good. I like this. Like, you know, once I got past kind of the info dumping, but then I kind of like started to get the info dumping and Galadriel as a character, and just became absolutely obsessed with the setting and what was going on in The Last Graduate. And yeah, I'm just like completely hooked by that. And then we have the disappointment of the third book in that series. If I can find the cover of it, I know it's in here somewhere. Where did it go? There we go. The Golden Enclaves. I'm going to put this at the top of meh. I think I gave this 3 stars, but it was so disappointing to me because of how much I loved the second book and what a great ending the second book had. This felt like it was too long, and there was like a bizarre cheating subplot that I was not here for, and I did not like that. I don't like cheating in books. And then the roughest draft is the first adult romance by Emily Wibberley and Austin Seachman Broca, who are a real life couple who write YA romance, and then they wrote this adult romance, and I read an arc of this like in one sitting. I was totally hooked by it, but I would give this like a 4-star. I really enjoyed it. It's a little more literary. It's not necessarily a light, fluffy romance, which the cover of this kind of indicates it might be a light, fluffy romance, and it's really not. So I'm going to put this down here. Then we have The Chosen One by Echo Brown, which unfortunately was also a disappointment for me. I loved and like will highly recommend for forever her first book, Black Girl Unlimited, but this was kind of in the same vein of semi-memoir, weird, like magical realism mixed with things that happened to her in her real life. And this was just too weird even for me. Like the memoir parts of this were great, but anytime it got into like the weird parts, it was so bizarre and so different tonally from the rest of the book. Like it didn't blend in the way that Black Girl Unlimited did, and it just was weird. And I'm chalking this one up to, this came out during the 2020-2022 book Black Hole. So a lot of these, like the newer books that I was disappointed by, I think a lot of that can be chalked up to people were writing these during really crappy years. So that's my theory. These are all authors I would read from again. Like the ones that I was disappointed by their new releases, I will still pick up whatever they write next. Another disappointment for me was Mrs. Death, but I am going to be keeping this book and rereading it again in the future. This is something that I thought I was going to love because people who tend to have similar opinions as me on books, like booktubers and people that I follow, really liked this, and I just could not connect to it at all. It was weird, but I was just like not vibing with it, and I was really disappointed. But I am going to hold on to that book because I physically bought it because I thought I was going to love it so much, and unfortunately I did not. Next up we have The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and this is one of my all-time favorite adult fantasy books. It's an epic Norse-inspired fantasy series with like dead gods who are being brought back to life, and it's incredible. I reread this preparing to read my arc of the sequel, and then I got a couple hundred pages into it and I never finished it, which is a thing that happened with multiple fantasy series for me this year, and I just was in a weird funk, and my reading was weird this year. I didn't read the way I normally do, just with all of the moving and the stress. Then we have, let's do Amari and the Night Brothers first, the first book in this series. This is a middle grade fantasy, and I adore this. We follow our main character, Amari, who is like a tween, and her brother has disappeared. Everyone thinks he's dead, and she receives a message and an invitation from her brother to join the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs, which is where he was working when he disappeared. And so she gets to go to this summer camp to start training to become an agent to kind of like police the supernatural world. But she's going with the intent of trying to investigate what happened to her brother, and she's the only person who's convinced he's still alive and trying to save him, and it is just fantastic. Then we have the sequel, Amari and the Great Game, and this one just was like, I really liked it, but it wasn't quite what I needed it to be. I'm going to put it at the top of liked it. It was like a 3.5 for me. The pacing felt a little off, and I felt like we didn't really get to sit and enjoy the world building the way we did in the first one, but I would still highly recommend it. And I think the things that bothered me about it would not bother a tween as much as they bothered me, but I do think it was slightly weaker than the first book. The first book is a full 5 stars both times I've read it. I absolutely adore it, and I will be picking up the next book in the series. I am also chalking this one up to written in the 2020-2022 black hole of books. Next up, we have Finley Donovan is Killing It, and I liked this. This was fine. I feel like this was really hyped up for me as something I was going to love, and it was fun. It was a 3-star. It's a little wacky. I feel like it kind of does a similar thing as Dial A for Aunties, but I think Dial A for Aunties does it better. I mean, obviously, like, the plots are different, but it's a similar, like, it does the same thing for the reader. But that one it was fine. I do have the sequel in here somewhere, don't I? Finley Donovan Knocks Him Dead. I liked this one more, so I'm going to put this at the top of liked it. This was like a 3.5, 3.75 kind of vibe for me. Then Your Dad Will Do is going at the top of Trash Panda Seal of Approval. I read all 4 of the novellas in this taboo, like, romance series by Katie Robert, and I really enjoyed that one. Next we have Tread of Angels by Rebecca Rowanhorse, which is a fantasy novella that I really think should have been a novel. There is so much world building in here, and I would argue there's too much world building for such a short novella. And I think the world building in this is absolutely fascinating. And if she wrote a full series of novels in this world, I would eat it up with a spoon. I think this world is so interesting, and there's so much more to explore. I just think that for something so short, you can't have such deep, intense world building, if that makes sense. Hatmakers was fine by Tamsin Merchant. This is like a middle grade series, but it skews younger, so I would say like 2nd, 3rd graders. It would be fun to read out loud with kids. I read the second book in the series too, The Mapmakers. Where is it? There we go. This I didn't like quite as much as the first one, but I think they're like great for the target audience. I just don't think they have a lot of adult readability, but this one does have, the Hatmakers has a gorgeous cover. Gifting Me to His Best Friend, also a fan of this one. So these are all like smutty, taboo novellas. That's like what they are. There's not a whole lot of plot. So then For the Wolf by Hannah Witten, I liked this. This was like a 3-star for me. It's not the greatest, but I had a good time with it. It was entertaining. There were elements of it that I thought were really interesting. And then I read the sequel, and I thought this was disappointing. This was really just not that great. It was supposed to kind of thematically be an inverse of the first book, and I found it to just be dumb, for lack of a better term. I just could barely get through it. And then These Hollow Vows by somebody or other, I can't remember who wrote this, was so bad. I can't believe I bamboozled myself into rereading that to read the sequel, because The sequel was also awful. It was worse than the first one. I don't understand why these have so much hype. I feel like I keep seeing them talked about as read next after ACOTAR type books, and these are just like it's like an AI was fed a bunch of fantasy tropes, like fantasy romance, YA tropes from the last 15 years, and then it just like regurgitated them. And it's so bland, and it doesn't make any sense at all, and it's like not romantic, and it just is so stupid. And I know so many people really like these, and I just do not understand. I don't understand it whatsoever. Next, we have Blood Scion, which this is on me. I should have DNF'd this. I got it from the library because I think this cover is absolutely stunning, and I wanted to buy it if I liked it. But I, again, as you can tell, have not been having the greatest of luck with new release YA fantasy. And so I started reading it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like every basic YA dystopian and fantasy trope, like mashed into a book. And it was weird because it dealt with some heavier topics, but the writing style was more almost written like a middle grade or a much younger YA book, but it was handling more mature topics and themes. And I just found that like the tone and the content being so discordant was really off-putting to me. So I just, like, I don't know who I would recommend this to. I know there are people who really like this, and I'm so glad they liked it because I think the cover is stunning. And I think there was some, like, Illumicrate edition that had, like, sprayed edges that was just gorgeous, and I was very bummed that I did not like it because I wanted an excuse to buy it because I still think that cover is beautiful. Next, we have an arc of Do I Know You, and this I'm going to put like right above the roughest draft. This is their sophomore, Emily Wibberley and Austin Siegemund-Broca, their sophomore adult romance. It comes out in the next few weeks here, and I had an arc of it, and I really enjoyed it. It's a marriage in trouble trope kind of book. Nothing like really bad happened, but their communication is broken down, and they pretend to spend a week on vacation as strangers and date each other and try to get to know each other again. Next, we have Theotanin the Fox Spirit, which was Jessie Q. Sutanto, who wrote Dial A for Aunties. It's her middle grade debut, and I liked this. I think, again, this would be good for younger middle grade kids, and it kind of reminds me of the movie. It was like Big Hero 6. A lot of like the vibes and stuff are the same. So if there is a child in your life who really likes that movie, I would recommend this. I thought the Fox Spirits point of view chapters were hilarious, and I liked those a lot. The humor in there is really great, which if you've read Dial A for Aunties, Jessie Q. Sutanto is really great at writing humor. So that was fun. Next we have Seasonal Fears by Shauna McGuire, which is a companion to Middle Game, and I really liked this. I know it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but I had a really good time with it. Not as perfect as Middle Game was for me. Middle Game's like an all-time favorite, but I still thought this was a 4-star read. I liked it. Next we have Neon Gods by Katie Robert. I'm going to put this here. I read 4 books in this series or something like that. I don't even know. Electric Idol, I think that was my favorite out of them. And then Wicked Beauty, I was disappointed that it wasn't steamier. It feels like as these books go on, she's trying to put more plot into them. And I'm not here for like politics and plot. I just want to read smut. And I feel like as this goes on, it's getting to be less smut and more like, here's all this political stuff happening in this fake Olympus place I've created. And where's the last one? Radiant Sin. I don't know. Something like that. I don't know. I think Electric Idol I think that's the Psyche one. That was my favorite so far. I have an arc of the 5th one that I just got, so I'll probably be reading that soon. Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake is another YA author's adult debut, and I really enjoyed this a lot. So I'm going to put this up here. This was a really fun time, a really great romance. Then we have The Cartographers by Pong Shepherd, and this is another disappointment for me. I'm going to put this here. The beginning of this, I thought this was going to be like a new all-time favorite book, and then as it went on, there are just so many point of view chapters and all of these flashbacks, and I really struggled to keep the characters straight. This isn't a very long book, so we don't get a ton of time with each character, and I really have issues with books that cram in a ton of, like, a huge cast of characters, and you don't get very much time to know them, and you're struggling to keep them all straight as you're reading. Next, we have 1,000 Steps into Night by Tracy Chee, which I give like a 3.75. It was fun. It was a really good time. It kind of feels like a Studio Ghibli. I always feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong, no matter what way I say it. But it felt like a movie. It was very fun. Like, there was nothing wrong with it. It's like great YA fantasy. It's a standalone. I would highly recommend to like teens. I thought it was really good. It's like solid 3.75. But like nothing that was like, this is my new favorite. That's what I mean. Light from Uncommon Stars. I'm going to put this like up here at the top of really liked it. I had such a good time with this. This is so surprising. This is a very strange book with a lot of different point of view characters. We have a woman who's made a deal with the devil. We have aliens. We have a violin repair shop. We have a violinist. We have like demons and all of these different things going on. So there's like fantasy stuff, there's sci-fi stuff, and it's like set in modern day in, I think it's like San Francisco area, or in California. It's somewhere in California. And it is just delightful and charming, but also and like whimsical and cozy, but also really hard hitting and deals with some really heavy topics. And it's weird and it's wonderful. And I don't know why this isn't quite a 5-star from me, but it's really, really good. And I feel like I haven't heard enough people talking about this, and it's pretty short, and it's just a really good time, and I would highly recommend it. Next, we have Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, which is a fantasy novella, and I liked this. This was fine. This was like a 3-star for me. I felt like the beginning was a little weak. We have like a girl who's trying to save her siblings from, well, she's lost one of her sisters, has died to an abusive marriage, and now she's trying to save the second older sister from the same fate as the first one, and she is like she's tasked with doing 3 impossible things in order to get like a fairy godmother to help her on her quest. So it's fun. It's fine. It wasn't like anything mind-blowing. Next, we have Comfort Me with Apples, which I am going to put at the top here. This is a new all-time favorite. I was mind blown. This is a kind of a speculative novella that is a retelling of a thing, and I'm not going to say what thing it is a retelling of, because discovering what it is a retelling of is absolutely mind-blowing, and I loved it, and it was so good. My Dad's Best Friend was probably my least favorite out of the Taboo series we're putting there at the bottom. I did not like Bridgerton at all. I like the TV show, not a fan of the book. I felt like both of the characters were just 2 giant red flags flapping at each other. King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. I feel like she was all over Book Talk for a while, and now I haven't like heard about her in a while. But I did not like this book at all. I got an arc of it, and I just did not particularly think it was good. Beasts and Beauty is a sort of like upper middle grade, lower YA fantasy retelling short story collection, or like fairy tale retelling short story collection. And this was like a 3.5-ish. Like, I really loved some of the short stories, and some of them were kind of meh, which happens in a short story collection. But the illustrations are beautiful, and if you are a like middle school teacher who's doing a unit on folktales or fairy tales, retellings, that sort of thing, I think it would be really interesting to pull in some of these like retellings when doing like an analysis of that sort of thing. I definitely think this has potential for use in the classroom. So that's the teen librarian in me that's like, this is how a teacher can use this. A Court of Silver Flames. I am trash. Don't ask me to explain why I love this book so much, because I don't know. I objectively know it's bad, and I still flip and love it. This is the first Lore Olympus book, and I really like this one. This was a 4-star, and then the other two are both 5 stars for me, so I'm just gonna mosey them up here. Let's put that there, and then where is the other? There we go. These are just so much fun. I'm obsessed with them. So then we have Recitative by Toni Morrison, that I can never say without choking on my words. And this is a short story that was republished this year with a foreword by, I believe, Zadie Smith. And the foreword is almost as long as the short story. And like together, like the essay, foreword, and the short story kind of form like a novella length thing. And this is really fascinating, and it definitely is very thought-provoking. It's the kind of story that I love, where the author doesn't give you answers and doesn't hold your hand and really forces you to think about things and think about what she's trying to say. We follow 2 women. One is Black and one is white, and Toni Morrison doesn't tell you who is who, and then it forces you to examine your beliefs and stereotypes, because as you're reading it, like, that's the whole point. Human nature, you're trying to figure out like who is who, and you're trying to see if you can like figure it out, and like you obviously can't figure it out, but you're like, oh well, like this person said this thing or does this thing or has this thought or this belief, so they must be white, and then they like say something else, and you're like, well, maybe they're not, maybe the other person's white, or like this person's Black, and you go back and forth, and it forces you to examine like what things are stereotypically like white or what things are stereotypically Black, and like examine why you think those things, or like it forces you to be really introspective. And I love books that force you to be a little uncomfortable and to not get answers and to like have to really think. And this is just it's an absolutely fascinating. And I really think the foreword adds so much to it, especially because there's like time, era specific things, and location specific things. It takes place, I think, in New York, and there's neighborhoods and cities that are mentioned that I would not have understood the like reference or the context or what that was supposed to be implying without like the foreword kind of explains some of that stuff for you. So I really liked that. Seducing My Guardian was not my favorite. Totally different, like 180 there. And then The Maid by Nita Prose. I did not particularly like this. I thought it was fun at the beginning, but the main character is cued as autistic, and by the end, I really disliked how the author wrote her, and the way she wrote her as an autistic character really was grinding my gears. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. And then Daughter of the Moon Goddess. I liked this. The first half, I think, is way weaker than the second half. The first half is very, You jump from place to place and thing to thing, and you never really get settled with the characters. The pacing's very choppy, very fast, and it just so much happens in a very short amount of time. And then in the second half, there's more like one thing we're focused on, and we get to know the characters a little bit more and slow down. And I liked that, and I liked where the end left off enough that I'm going to pick up the sequel, but I am going to probably have to reread this because I read that almost a year ago at this point. Next, we have Babel, which was another disappointment for me. So I'm going to put this here, somewhere in there. I prefer books that don't have such a... I like it when authors don't hold you by the hand. And I guess like that's a perfect example. So like what I loved about Recitatif, the opposite was true with Babel, where I felt like the author was being very didactic. Like I clearly agree with the author's message and her points about colonialism, but I don't like having my hand held. I want an author to trust their writing enough to get the message across without having to repetitively, tell me what the message is and what is bad and what is good and like what their thoughts are. And I just did not love this. I also think that I was expecting there to be more of a fantastical element, and it honestly felt like absolutely nothing. Like this didn't feel like an alternate history. It felt like she was afraid to change anything about like this world that is apparently different because it has magical silver working that involves translation and stuff. It just didn't feel any different. Like the magic could have been totally removed from it and nothing would have changed, just because like there is magic added to it and nothing was changed about like what actually was going on. I don't know if that makes sense. I know so many people love this, and I'm really glad that those people connected to it and found like their new favorite thing. And I just didn't particularly like the writing style of this. It reads more historical fiction than fantasy, and I historically don't like historical fiction, so that really isn't surprising. I think I was expecting there to be more fantasy in this, and there just wasn't. Next we have Squire by, I can't remember. This is a graphic novel. And it was like a solid 3-star. I liked it. I didn't think it did anything particularly like new and inventive, but it was fun. It was a good time. I'd recommend it to like teens. Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I really, really loved this, and I feel like a lot of people didn't like it because it was marketed to the wrong audience. So a lot of people picked this up after reading Addie LaRue and being obsessed with Addie LaRue, and Addie LaRue is obviously an adult novel, and this is a creepy, like that has more romance stuff. This is a creepy, dark, like upper middle grade, lower YA story in the vein of Neil Gaiman's like Graveyard Book or Coraline. And I could definitely see why so many people who picked this up because it was the next book that came out after Addie LaRue were like, what is this? And didn't like it, but I loved it. This is the kind of book, like middle grade YA crossover book that I love. Next we have Homicide in Hollow Hollow, which is the sequel to Arsenic and Adobo, and I did not like this. We're going to put this here. I think I'm done with this series. The writing is just really immature, and all of the characters felt really immature, and it just was not for me. Next up, we have Book of Night by Holly Black, which was another huge disappointment for me this year. I think I gave it 3 stars because I liked the ending, but like, honestly, I got like 40% of the way into my arc and then just didn't care. And then I put it down, and I ended up restarting it when it came out. I got the audiobook and I read it that way, and it just was like a huge letdown. It felt like the first or second draft. It didn't feel like a completed novel, if that makes sense. Next we have Chef's Kiss, which was a cute graphic novel. I'm going to put this like here. It follows a group of like kids, 20-somethings who are just out of college and starting their first jobs and trying to figure out what they want to do. Next we have Sea of Tranquility, which was probably my favorite. This or Comfort Me with Apples were probably my favorite new to me books that I read this year. And then In the Shadow of Lightning was probably my favorite, like, adult fantasy. So this I read in one sitting. It was mind-blowing, and I loved it. And I actually have never read Station 11 by her, and I thought The Glass Hotel was just, like, fine. So I was shocked that I loved that as much as I did. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I'm going to put this here. It was fine. It was a perfectly serviceable retelling of Fall of the House of Usher. It was very predictable. I knew from the first page what the ending was going to be, but it was still had vibes. It was creepy. It was fine. The cover's creepy and weird, but it was fine. Next we have Evershore by Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Patterson. This, again, I'm going to put this in, like, the middle of liked it. I really loved the other two novellas that were packaged with this. There's, like, a bind-up that just came out, and I read this separately from the other two, and I feel like if I read all three of them, like, I kind of had forgotten some of the details of what was going on by the time I got to this one, and I think if I read them all back to back, I would have liked this more. I just was kind of like, what's going on? I forgot some of the details. But this takes place during, I believe, the same time as Cytonic, which is the third book in the Skyward series, which wasn't particularly good. Honestly, I think the novellas are way better, way more interesting than Cytonic was. So those are my thoughts and feelings on that. The Paris Apartment was horrible. It was a 1 star. It was so bad. I was very disappointed. I've loved and liked things from Lucy Foley before in the past, and this was abysmal. So I don't know what the heck happened there. 4 Aunties and a Wedding. I liked this. I didn't enjoy it the same way I did Dial A for Aunties, but it was still solid. I'm going to put it towards the top of liked it. It was like a 3.75 kind of book. Now, if we want to talk about books that were marketed to the wrong audience, if we were talking about, Gallant, In a Garden Burning Gold. If you like Rory Powers YA books, please do not pick this up. You will hate this. And I feel like the only people that picked this up are people who read Rory Powers YA books. I do not like Rory Powers YA books. I've read them because they were popular with teens, and I read them so I could recommend them to the right people. I did not like them. I, however, loved In a Garden Burning Gold, and now it has a really low, like, average rating on Goodreads because the only people that picked it up to begin with were people who read her YA, and so the people who would actually like this are not going to pick it up. They're like, oh, this has a low rating on Goodreads. I really, really enjoyed this. This was like a 4.5. I was in such a reading funk. I wasn't reading like epic fantasy, and I picked this up and I was completely hooked by it, and I read this so quickly and it snapped me out of my funk, and I really liked the characters, and I really liked the world building, and I liked the politics, and I liked how messy it was, and I feel like I'm the only person in the world that really likes this book, and I just got an arc of the sequel, and I'm going to reread this and then read the sequel, so we'll see if I was just crazy, but I really, really enjoyed this book when I read it. Next up we have Book Lovers, which I'm going to put down here. This is probably like a 4.75. I gave it 5 stars, but I think this is probably like towards the bottom of, I've loved all of her books, but this is probably one of the ones I've loved the least, if that makes sense, that I still feel very positively about it. But it was not quite as perfect as Happy Place, which doesn't come out until this year, but I had an arc of it. And this is fantastic. If you felt let down by Book Lovers, and you want something more like People We Meet on Vacation, then Happy Place is for you, and you should get hyped about it. If you want something that feels like People We Meet on Vacation, this is it, my friend. Get hyped. Then we have The Bodyguard by Catherine Center, which I adored, and I am shocked that I loved this as much as I did. I listened to it while I put up my Christmas tree, And I listened to it like all in one sitting, and I was hooked. This was so good. This was so cute and fun and lighthearted and just really, really adorable, especially considering there's like no steam or spice or anything like that. It's just a romance, and it's very, very cute, and I had such a good time with it. And then Grief of Stones by Catherine Addison is the sequel to Witness for the Dead, and this was like a 3.75. I liked it a little bit less than Witness for the Dead, but it was still like a solid crime procedural kind of book. Twin Crowns is like a co-authored book, and I can't remember who the authors are. I liked this. It was like a middle of the road 3-star. I wanted something really fluffy and predictable and stupid to read while I was, this was like one of the last books I read before we moved out of our apartment. I had a lot going on. I wanted something I didn't have to think about, and this fit the bill. It wasn't like bad at all. I liked it. It was good for what it was. It's pretty predictable YA fantasy, but sometimes predictable YA fantasy has its place, and it's good predictable YA fantasy. So 3 stars, solid. Wash Day Diaries is a slice of life graphic novel following a group of Black friends, and it all kind of centers around or themes around their hair and like getting their hair done. And obviously there's other stuff going on in their lives. Like someone has a grandmother with dementia. Someone has a boyfriend who is like harassing / stalking them and won't leave them alone. And it just, someone's struggling with depression, and it's just a really beautiful story. Whoever did the coloring on this, like absolutely fantastic. The colors are just so beautiful. The whole palette is gorgeous. And this was such a surprise. I'd had this on my TBR for a while, and I picked it up on December 31st because I needed like 2 more books to complete my Goodreads challenge. So I was like, I'll read, some graphic novels. I'll get them from the library. And I downloaded it on Libby, and it was just fantastic. So highly recommend if you like slice of life graphic novels. Then we have Sometime in Summer by Katrina Leno. This is my 4th Katrina Leno book, and this is by far my favorite. I cried when I read this. This is a upper middle grade, lower YA contemporary. She's like 14, 15, and so I guess like younger YA. She is struggling because her parents are getting divorced, and she doesn't understand why. And so her mom takes her to her great aunt's beach house to sort of like get away from it all for the summer. And while she's there, she makes some friends, but there's maybe some like more stuff going on, some fantastical stuff going on in the background. And it's just a very heartfelt book about her sort of processing all of the changes that are going on in her life and what it's like to be a kid and have these huge changes going on in your life, and you have no agency. Like, you can't control your parents getting divorced. You can't control, like, her mom is selling her bookstore and she can't control that. And these are all huge things that are very fundamental to her life. And she's struggling to process all of this stuff and like how to come to terms with it since she can't control it. And it's just really beautiful story. Next we have When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. And I'm going to put this towards the top of liked it. This was like a 3.75. I really liked this. It basically follows a girl whose mother has turned into a dragon along with hundreds of thousands of other American women. And it's like a feminist kind of fairy tale set in like the 1950s and 60s, if that even makes sense. It's got a lot of feminine rage, and it's a very like cool metaphor. It can be a little heavy-handed at times, but it's not as bad as some other stuff that I found to be too didactic. but it was definitely like a very enjoyable read. Next, we have Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed, and this was marketed also, I think, to the wrong people. I kept hearing about this as a dark fairy tale retelling, and I would say, even though there are some very slight fairy tale retelling elements in this is more of just a really dark, heavy, depressing book. I did like it. It was just way darker than I was anticipating. I actually think this ended up on the horror list for Goodreads, and I wouldn't say it's horror, it's just very dark and very heavy. If you don't like reading about certain things, please look at one of the many trigger warning lists on Goodreads. There was some stuff in here that turned my stomach that I did not expect to be in this book. Again, I think Ava Reed's writing is beautiful. I just really was not expecting it to be the way it was. Then we have the Agathas, which is a YA murder mystery, and I actually really enjoyed this. I'm going to put this here. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I don't pick up a whole lot of YA, and I've never read from those authors before, so I was surprised that I really actually enjoyed it. Then we have the Atlas 6, and I'm going to put this down here. I liked it. I did not love it the way everyone and their mom was hyping it up. For me, it was fine. It's pretentious. Olive E. Blake that's how she writes. I also read Alone with You in the Ether by her, so while we're doing this, I'm just gonna do this now, and I actually like this more. I don't know if liked it is the correct term, but it made me feel a whole lot of things. I didn't necessarily like either of the characters. I kind of wanted to scream at them the entire time, but it elicited some of the strongest emotions that any book I read this year has elicited. So, we're going to put this here, I guess. I don't really know how I feel about it, but I did feel strongly. So, then we have another book that I feel like nobody has talked about, and it's on rotation, and it follows a woman in med school and her family life and her romance life, and the author is herself a doctor, and I really appreciated this because one of my biggest pet peeves is probably maybe like somewhere here. Okay, let's do it there. One of my biggest pet peeves is when authors write romantic interests that are doctors or residents, and they don't understand how medical training works, and it's so obvious that they don't understand it, like things that could be solved with a very basic Google search or like looking at the R residence or R medical school page on Reddit for like a half an hour. Stuff that's just so incredibly wrong, and I loved reading. My husband's a doctor. I've been with him since undergrad, so I have been through almost all my friends are doctors. A lot of my family, like my husband's whole family, are pretty much all doctors. Like everyone I know is a doctor. So when people get it wrong, it really drives me nuts. So to read something where someone got it so right, this is the perfect example of writing what you know. The way she handles the family stuff and brings in her own like cultural experiences, just absolutely beautiful. I had such a good time with this. I thought it was a really fun book, and I will definitely be picking up whatever she writes next. She's a new auto-read author for me. The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert was fine. It was fine. It's got a dragon with 2 members, so that's what that is. And then the next book in that series was The Kraken's Sacrifice, and I thought this was so bad. So I did not like that at all. That's just going in bad, bad, bad. There was no seal of approval for that one. Next we have Belladonna, which is the first book in the new duology or series by Adeline Grace. And I actually really liked this. I did not like I only read the first book, like her debut book. I didn't read the sequel to it, and I did not like that. So I was shocked that I really liked this quite a bit. I actually bought the book, which I was, again, surprised by. But it was like fun. It was romantic. It was dark. It read like older YA. I just liked the vibes. I liked the mystery. I liked the characters. I liked everything about it. And then we have Thank You for Listening. That's tied up here with The Bodyguard. Is probably my like favorite romances of the year. This is excellent. I actually listened to the audiobook while I physically read it because Julia Wayland's, who's the author, narrates her own book, and she's like the audiobook narrator. So I had just an excellent time with this. I thought the chemistry was stunning, just absolutely gorgeous, obsessed. Then we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and I actually really liked this. So this is also kind of heavy-handed and like could have had the same pitfalls that Babel had for me, but this leans more like satire than trying to be a fantasy. This isn't a fantasy. And I got an arc of it, and I actually really liked it. And the narrative voice for this is very different than the narrative voice for Babel or The Poppy War. And like, is it still pretty heavy-handed? Yes, but I can deal with that in a satire versus like a fantasy book. I don't know if that makes sense, but it worked for me in this format, and it didn't. I don't know. So it's very short, and it's ridiculous, and it's like over the top, but it's like over the top in the way that like real life is over the top, and you could totally see this happening in real life. And it's just like the main character is a terrible person, and she has no insight, no self-awareness at all into how horrible she is, and it is just a wild ride. Heated by Naima Simone was not good either. I shouldn't have read that. I've read other stuff by her, and I was looking for something fun, like a fun romance to read, and I think I downloaded an arc of this, and the premise was just really kind of stupid. So I like read the premise, and I thought it was going to be something different than what it was, and I did not like it. I've read other things by Naima Simone and liked them, so I was kind of disappointed by that. Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. I loved this. I read an arc of it like a year ago at this point, and it was really like excellent for me. Probably I just read her The Love Theoretically. I just read that last night. And probably somewhere Love on the Brain and Love Theoretically are probably tied for my favorite thing by her. Below Zero was probably my least favorite thing. I'm going to put this in meh. I did not like this one. I was irritated that we didn't even get like a full steamy scene with them together, and it kind of like cuts off in the middle of the scene, and I was very disappointed by that. Then we have Stuck With You, which I actually really liked this. I think this was like a 4-star for me. I'm going to put this like here. And then Under One Roof, I really liked this quite a bit. So we're going to put this like over here. I really loved it. I think I gave it a full 5 stars. I liked the like roommates in like enemies into friends into lovers situation that one had. Demon in the Wood is the like Darkling backstory as a graphic novel. I'm gonna put this like down here towards the bottom. I've really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. There's like nothing wrong with it, but it's a very short graphic novel, so there's also not like a lot to it. Next we have Into the Windwracked Wilds, which is in Middle Game. There's a series of children's books that there are snippets of that are like in-universe children's books, and then Shauna Maguire actually is writing that children's book series, and it kind of explains some of the alchemical principles from Middle Game. Yeah, it like really doesn't make sense. I'm going to put this one in the middle of liked it. You could definitely read these separately from middle game. And honestly, they're written like children's books. You could read them to children, but they are part of the world of an adult fantasy series. So they're published by an adult imprint. Next we have Into the Riverlands by Nevo that I'm going to put at the top of really liked it. I just reread this and I think this is like a 4-star for me. I don't love it quite as much as I love, like When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, which is my favorite. And then, The Empress of Salt and Fortune. So this is again, another book, like the series. What I love about Nevo's writing, actually I'm going to put, this is like a 4.5. I'm going to put this like up here. She like 4.7. I really love these. And I feel like the more I read this, even reading it a second time, there were more like aha moments. She does not spell anything out for you. And you have to really pay attention to her books. You have to reread them. And every time you read them, you come to more understanding of what is going on. And it is just masterfully done. She is just one of my favorite authors out there right now. She's brilliant. The Ballad of Never After. I'm going to like put this down here. I think I'm going to read the third book in this series. And if this is also like a 2-star, then I think I'm just going to be done with, what's her face, whoever writes these. Then we have Things We Never Got Over, which was abysmally bad. And I don't understand why this has such a massive cult following on Book Talk. It is 200 pages too long. The characters who are in their mid-30s to early 40s act like they're 12, and the steamy scenes are so, like, bad. Like, if he was a real-life dude, he would be terrible, like a terrible lover. He definitely has, like, all of the scenes are written with that, like, dude has a magic appendage, and the second he enters you, like, you are just overcome with all of the pleasure in the universe, and, like, he doesn't need to use his hands or do anything extra, like, you're just going to explode with sparkles and rainbows, and, like, it definitely has that going on, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, this dude is awful. Like, it like works if you're writing a fictional book where you can just make people magically, you know, have a good time, but like it just was so badly, like it wasn't even worth it. It wasn't like there were good steamy scenes or something. The whole thing was just so dumb, and I don't understand why people like that. And then we have River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, which is a series of like deleted scenes and short stories from the world of the Devabad trilogy, and like scenes that she wanted to write that like didn't fit in the books, like stuff that takes place in between time jumps. So I had a really good time with this. It made me want to reread the Devabad trilogy, which is one of my favorite things of all time. Next, we have My Killer Vacation, which I am going to put in bad, bad, bad. I think I gave it 2 stars, but it was not good. I feel like Tessa Bailey is either a hit or a miss for me. And when she gets it right, she really gets it right. And when she gets it wrong, like she really gets it wrong. Like it's either like a 4.5 or 5 or like a 1.5, 2-star. Like there's no in between with me and Tessa Bailey. And it makes her a very interesting reading experience because I keep picking up her stuff because when she gets it right, they're like some of my favorite romance books. And then other times it's just a disaster. But this was one of her like indie published books, and it was so bad. Like she uses the word Johnson unironically. And then also, you're not getting knifed, you're getting wifed was definitely a line in the book. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? It was just so weird. And then Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldrey, is a very cozy fantasy romance. And I really liked this. I'm going to put this, yeah, there feels about right. It was 5-star. Like, I literally can't think of anything that was wrong with it. Next we have Praise by Sarah Kate, and this was fine. I I am actually going to put this in Trash Panda seal of approval. I'm going to put this like there. It was a 3-star. It was whatever. However, the sequel, Eyes on Me, was fantastic. It had absolutely amazing chemistry between the two characters. I think that this is just an incredible romance book. They're step siblings, and so it's like a little taboo, but like not too taboo, but like they weren't like raised together from a super young age. He's older than her, and so they like weren't ever really in the same house together, but it's very hot. I liked it a lot. Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey was such a disappointment. I wanted to love this. I read this while we were moving. I like made time to read this like literally in the middle of moving, and I was just not happy with it. I'm gonna put this, I guess, here. It was a 2-star. There's this like weird like secret pen pal plotline that doesn't make any sense, and the way anxiety was used as a plot point just felt icky to me, and I like still can't entirely put my finger on why it feels so icky, but it just felt bad, and I did not like that. Next we have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, which was cute. Like, I liked this. I'm gonna put this like right there, and liked it. It was a cute, fun, lighthearted fantasy read and like fantasy romance. It was cute. And then I actually liked, this is a short story novella that takes place before Half a Soul. I actually liked this better. It's kind of the backstory for the Lord Sorcier, like how he became who he is, and it kind of gave me like the same vibes as like the like Watson's narration from Sherlock Holmes, which is a really weird comparison, but it's narrated by his friend who's also in Half a Soul, who was like in the army with him, and I liked that a lot. Next we have Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, which I think comes out this spring, and I really liked this. I'm gonna give this was a 4-star, so I'm going to put this like, I don't know, I probably liked it, no, more than, let's put it there. This was like a solid fantasy novella, and it makes me excited to read more from Fonda Lee, like writing in different fantasy genres. And then we have House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher, which also isn't out yet, but I really liked this. If you like her other horror stuff, you will probably like this. It's kind of a similar formula, but I feel like she improves upon herself with each book, and this is her strongest one yet, I think. So this is like a 4-star. I'm going to put this there. And then we have Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire, which is the newest Wayward Children book, and I loved this. It made me cry. It's just, it was beautiful, emotional, everything. Then we have The Mysteries of Thorn Manor, which is a companion sequel novella to Sorcery of Thorns, and it is good. If you like the open ending of Sorcery of Thorns, I would recommend you don't pick this up, but it was cute. It was solid. It kind of has like a Christmassy theme. It reads like author-written fan fiction, which like there's nothing wrong with, but it's nothing mind-blowing. There's not a lot of plot. It's fluffy. It's cute. There's romance. It is what it is. It was a good quick read. Then we have Lovelight Farms by B.K. Borston, which I feel like was Borison. I feel like this was all over everywhere in December because it's like a really cute romance that takes place on a Christmas tree farm, and this like was really cute. I'm gonna put this there. It was a solid 4-star read. There is like a friends to lovers mutual pining thing going on. It was very cute. Then we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, I think. And I was shocked that I loved this because pretty much every other romance book that I've picked up because Book Talk likes it, I've hated or have been meh about. And I unironically really loved this. So I was not expecting that at all, but I really did. So I'm going to put this here. There is plenty of like Trash Panda goodness in it, but I feel like there's enough plot that I can justify not putting it in Trash Panda seal of approval. And then Thick as Thieves, I believe this is the one that follows the two guys. This one was like really, really cute. I think this was like a 4-star though. I'm gonna put this probably a little bit higher. I'm gonna put this like up here. And then that's it. These are all of the books that I read in 2022, how I felt about them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I got a few DMs from people asking me to do this, so hopefully this makes like all 3 of you who wanted this happy. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you in my next one. Bye, guys.